March 27, 2016. Miriam Rodriguez, gripping a loaded gun, stood at point-blank range with one of 10 men responsible for the kidnapping and murder of her daughter. Fueled by vengeance, she took a decision in that heart-stopping moment that changed the course of her life forever. An unsung hero. 4 a.m. on January 24, 2014, Miriam got a call from her eldest daughter, Azalea, telling her that her 20-year-old daughter, Karen, had been abducted. At the time, 54-year-old Miriam worked as a nanny for a wealthy family in McAllen, Texas. She was employed full-time and had to live with them. However, once Azalea broke the news to her, she immediately packed her bags, left a goodbye note for the family, and headed straight for the International Bridge in Reynosa to catch a bus to Tamaulipas, Mexico, where the rest of her family lived. While on the ride home, Miriam fought hard to process the fact that her daughter had just become one of tens of thousands to be abducted by the notorious Zetas cartel. Ever since 2010, when the Zetas stormed San Fernando, Tamaulipas, the city's become a shadowy reflection of what it used to be. Government buildings are vandalized daily, and chunks of human remains are displayed on roadsides like mortal scarecrows. No one's safe, especially with the high number of kidnappings that have been prompted banks to begin granting loans to pay off ransoms. More than a fifth of the population had fled or disappeared from San Fernando following the Zeta takeover. Parents also had to shield their children's eyes from the carnage that could spring up on any corner. While this might sound like a scene out of an apocalyptic movie, it was the harsh reality for many Mexicans residing in this joyless city, and it certainly was the reality for Miriam back then. Once she got home and reunited with her family, she answered a phone call from the kidnappers, who demanded a ransom in exchange for Karen's release. They made it explicitly clear that they had no intentions to kill her, and once they got what they wanted, she would be released unharmed. Filled with a perfect blend of hope and despair, Miriam's husband, Luis, headed to the bank to get a loan. Luis had been a store proprietor for more than 20 years, earning him respect amongst residents of his city. He also had good credit, making him get an instant loan for the ransom. However, while at the bank with Miriam, they answered another phone call from the kidnapper, who informed him of the location to drop the ransom. The family had bundled together all their life savings, along with what the bank gave, altogether a little less than $10,000. Consequently, Miriam and her husband got to the drop-off zone, where a Zetas member came to collect the bag of money. But Karen wasn't with them. In turn, they assured him that their daughter would be waiting for him in the parking lot of a cemetery a few blocks away. And maybe he meant that ironically, because by the time they got there and waited for hours, Karen never showed up. But wait, before we conclude that Karen had been killed, it might interest you to know that Miriam and her family were extorted a few more times in hopes of getting their daughter released. 2 days after waiting endlessly for Karen, Miriam was approached by a self-proclaimed leader of the Zetas named Sama. Now, Sama met with Miriam and assured her that her daughter was safe and would be released on the condition that he'd be given an extra $2,000. Wait, what? Can you believe this? They wanted more money. They've already mopped up all their savings. Where the heck are they supposed to get this from? It made no sense. But little about the Zetas made sense anymore. Most of the original members were dead or in jail, leaving a younger generation in their place. The broken structure meant the organization was unpredictable, especially at the local level, and far less experienced. In theory, that meant that maybe Sama was telling the truth. Maybe some underlings had taken Karen without permission or knowledge of the higher-ups, in which case, Miriam thought she needed to play along. Filled with doubt, Miriam paid the $2,000 and then another $500, which was just a fraud she fell for. In the end, she would never see her daughter, marking the beginning of her quest to hunt down Karen's killers. Trapping the mice.
I'm gonna find the people who did this to my daughter, and I'm gonna make them pay.
That's what she said after a month of not hearing a word from the cartel or seeing her daughter. She'd concluded that Karen was dead, and somebody or some people definitely had to pay. February 2014, she called Lieutenant Alex, the Marine whose number she had received from a stranger on the bus to San Fernando. It was while conversing with him that Miriam realized how different the Marines operated from the local police. They were decisive and lethal, slaying their enemies at a ratio of nearly 30-1 and killing more enemies than they wounded. They were the same men who captured Mexico's most notorious drug lord, Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. And Miriam was more than certain that capturing a few low-level Zeta sicarios would be an easy-peasy task for him. Now, a few days after that conversation, Miriam had her first lead. She miraculously spotted two teen girls at a plaza using Karen's laptop, which was with her at the moment of her kidnapping. Miriam immediately contacted Alex, and in less than an hour, both girls were taken to a secret location where they divulged their knowledge about the laptop and the Zetas. This resulted in the raid of a Zetas kidnapping camp, which saw the release of about a dozen individuals, but none of them were Karen. Miriam accompanied in the raid, and after the brief firefight, went deeper into the site searching for any hint that Karen had been there. Luckily, she found a scarf and a seat cushion, both belonging to her daughter. Trust me when I say you absolutely don't want to know what happened to both girls Miriam found with the laptop, and certainly not what the Marines did with the captured sicarios. But one thing was clear, the soldiers killed in the raid were only a part of the crew responsible for Karen's disappearance. Yeah, now their deaths were some form of justice for the millions of other crimes they must have committed, but at the same time, these were witnesses that she needed alive if she was ever going to find out what happened to her daughter. Miriam wanted to hold the Zetas responsible, to track them down and punish them, as she had promised her daughter Azalea. But she also wanted to understand why Karen had been taken, and by whom. And more than anything, she needed to know where her daughter was. The Hunt Down. September 15, 2014. Miriam's son, Luis Jr., was closing down his own shop in Ciudad Victoria to attend a festival, but he had one last customer who was browsing hats to buy. Luis recognized his face and stopped what he was doing to take a closer look. And voila, it was Sama, the same one who had met Miriam and extorted an extra $2,000 in exchange for her daughter. Now, how did Luis know this? Well, a few months prior, Miriam, during her investigation, ran into the mechanic who had worked on Karen's car the night before she was kidnapped. Coincidentally, this mechanic was also kidnapped by the Zetas, but to his own luck, was released. Miriam then stalked this man until she could get a conversation with him about what he'd seen while in their custody. Carlos the mechanic finally agreed to speak with her, but the only information he could provide was the name of the man who was in charge, Sama. At that point, everything clicked. Miriam had always suspected that Sama was behind her daughter's kidnapping, even though he had been convincing in his offer to help find Karen. Miriam was certain she could recognize Sama, but the one thing she needed and had no idea how to find was his real identity. For the case to proceed, for the police to even issue a warrant, they needed Sama's name. Miriam would spend weeks tracking down people she thought might know him, even paying shady cartel members for intelligence on his whereabouts. Nothing worked. She spent hours and hours on Facebook searching names, posts, and pictures tagged with the name Sama. But after about a month, she finally found something. She saw a picture of him which was blurry, but she definitely could recognize the face. However, a picture wasn't enough. She now needed an address, and the only way to find that was to find the lady who stood beside him in that picture. The lady wore this uniform of a local ice cream chain in San Fernando, Helado Sultana. If you think about it, there's hundreds of these stores in the area. Where the heck was Miriam gonna find this lady? It seemed like an impossible mission, but after spending weeks sitting outside of these stores and questioning tons of employees, Miriam finally spotted Sama's girlfriend coming out of one. She then watched and waited for several more weeks, until Sama finally showed up. And that's when our story takes a wild turn. Miriam took her old uniform as a medical practitioner, her expired government ID, and made the trek back to the neighborhood in Ciudad Victoria, where a day earlier she had followed Sama and his girlfriend home from Helado Sultana. One by one, she conducted a mock survey of every home on the block, asking about the number of children, adults, and seniors residing there, all in a bid to get more information about Sama. At this time, Miriam had dyed her hair bright red and cut it short, masking her identity from the Zetas members who were following her everywhere she went. Her job was successful, getting as much information on Sama as she needed. Consequently, she handed over the information to the authorities in the capital and waited for them to arrest Sama. But as you might have guessed, the cops didn't do anything. When a week passed by with no action taken, Miriam began calling to check on her request, badgering the authorities to issue a warrant. When that didn't work, she sent a formal letter. But by the time investigators finally would get around to checking on that location where Sama was living, he was no longer there. Sama was obviously smarter than Miriam had thought, but thankfully, she had a backup plan. By then, she had traced an entire network of individuals connected to Sama and the Zetas. Through his Facebook page, she connected the dots between men she believed kidnapped Karen. She had the sophisticated evidence against him, but it all meant nothing without officials willing to do their jobs. Miriam once again decided to do things her way. The town of Ciudad Victoria wasn't so large, fewer than 350,000 people. If Sama was still around, there would be a chance of someone she trusted running into him. She shared photos of him with her family members, and that's how her son Luis was able to recognize him. The moment he did, Luis immediately called his mother, telling her that he had found his sister's killer. She immediately called the one police officer she was sure would respond, and together tracked down Sama and arrested him. But what seemed like the end to the story was only the beginning. Vengeance.
They told me they'd killed her in an awful way. I never gave me the details of exactly how they had done it.
Those were Sama's words after being pressured by federal police officers to make a confession. If all the signs hadn't been clear before, they certainly were now. Karen was dead. While Miriam was sad about this, it made her have a new purpose: to make the men responsible pay. Sama, while in custody, divulged more names that had a hand in Karen's death. One of which was 18-year-old Christian Jose Zapata Gonzalez. He was the youngest of them, but not too young to face the wrath of the law. Gonzalez was subsequently arrested, bringing the total number ratted out by Sama to 8 out of 10. 6 had been killed by Mexican Marines during their operations months ago. Sama himself was the 7th, and Gonzalez was the 8th. But Miriam wasn't willing to quit until all 10 members involved were brought to justice. March 27, 2016. Miriam was hiding and holding a loaded .38 pistol near Matamoros International Bridge, which links Matamoros, Mexico and Brownsville, Texas. Wearing a baseball cap and a trench coat, she waited for the 9th member on her list. He was known as the Florist, and when she spotted him, she pulled out her gun and pointed it right at him, holding him down until the police arrived. All that was left were 2 more Zetas members for Miriam to retire from her years of enacting vengeance. However, at this point, some culprits were dead and others in jail. Those still on the street trying to forge new lives as taxi drivers, gas delivery men, or in the case of Enrique Yolo Rubio Flores, a born-again Christian. Rubio Flores was the 10th man involved in Karen's kidnapping, but unlike the others, he had moved away from San Fernando to start a new life as a pastor in Aldama. Miriam was able to trace him down there with the information from his grandfather in San Fernando. When Miriam got there with a few Mexican officers, they arrested Flores. But keep in mind, at this time, Miriam had started a support group for parents of kidnapped children called Colectivo de Desaparecidos de San Fernando, which translates to the Vanished Collective of San Fernando. It was a small group of people in San Fernando who Miriam had gathered together in the 3 years of avenging Karen's death. And quite surprisingly, this group had grown to over 600 members. On the other hand, Miriam received countless death threats from gangs and family members of the people she'd helped put away. Close friends felt she was going too far, but just like the words of Vincent van Gogh, Miriam had put her heart and soul into her work and had lost her mind in the process. Her investigation brought her fame in Mexico. She was a woman in her 50s fighting a notorious cartel. I mean, that's something we don't see every day. But at the same time, Miriam realized that she might be in danger, particularly after almost 24 prisoners escaped the penitentiary in Ciudad Victoria, where her efforts had put her daughter's killers. This made her seek protection from the Mexican government, but before bodyguards could be dispatched to her location, the Zetas finally took her out. Continuing the cause. May 10th, 2017. Miriam left work at her store and drove home for the night. On getting to her residence, she would struggle exiting her car as she began using crutches due to an accident that occurred a month before. Miriam broke her foot chasing down one of the last targets on her list, a young woman who had left town and begun working as a live-in nanny for a family in Ciudad Victoria. She was said to have been involved in the kidnapping of Karen and was the 11th member on Miriam's list, though not officially documented. She reportedly hung Karen like a boxing bag and repeatedly punched and tortured her while she was still alive. And if we're to go by what we know of Miriam now, we'd know that she'd never let such a person go scot-free. True to her form, Miriam spent days parked near the family's home, waiting for the young woman to emerge. She would urinate in cups and run her car battery down listening to the radio in the dark. When police finally arrested the young woman outside the home, Mrs. Rodriguez tripped as she ran towards him, fracturing her foot. She was still wearing her cast and using her crutches as she stepped out of her car, moving slowly into her home. But out of nowhere, this white Nissan truck carrying Zeta Sicarios quietly pulled up behind her. Miriam, though injured, tried pulling out a pistol from her purse, but before she could, the Sicarios collectively fired 13 shots, with 8 actually connecting with her body. Inside her home, her husband was watching television when he heard the shots ring out. He came outside to find Miriam, lying in a pool of her own blood, with her hand gripping the pistol in her purse. She was taken to the hospital where she was pronounced dead. Looks like the story of Miriam Rodriguez had come to an end. Or had it? Miriam's son Luis took over her support group. He thrived to complete what his mother had started. But the violence in Mexico and Tamaulipas intensified to the point where almost everyone was scared of being the next target. The death of Miriam Rodriguez served as a warning that absolutely no one was safe. June 7, 2020, 117 murders were reported in 24 hours, one of the highest ever recorded in a single day. This time, the perpetrators weren't the Zetas. Instead, a more formidable criminal organization, the CJNG, inflicting violence on the people of Mexico. So maybe if Miriam had received proper protection from the government, she would have still been alive. Maybe if she hadn't broken her foot, she would have taken cover when the Sicarios attacked. And maybe, just maybe, you like this video and subscribe to the channel, turning on those post notifications so you don't miss out on future videos. But in the end, Miriam Rodriguez will forever be remembered as an unsung hero to the people of Mexico, a woman brave enough to wage war against an entire cartel.